Good morning. Today we look at Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 20. And there are some kind of hard words in this passage, and it's not a surprise. I mean, there's a lot of times that what Jesus says to us seems hard, and in some ways seems kind of harsh, and other times seems like, how do we do that? And that's the way it begins, chapter 18. You know, the disciples ask, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus, it says, calls a child. And he put this child among them and said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child, will be the greatest. And whoever welcomes such a one welcomes one in my name. And he isn't saying that we have to revert to being, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And then, when I think of Jesus with this child I'm thinking of a pretty young child. And you think about it, a child is, really dependent, totally dependent upon their parents or someone, community, for care. I mean, you think about a baby. I mean, a baby can't change its own diaper, can't warm its own bottle, can't, eat on its own. I mean, they're dependent. And so in so many ways, Jesus is saying, we've got to learn to rely on God. We've got to learn to trust God. We've got to learn and know that God provides for us, and don't take all the credit for ourselves. I mean, when people grow up and get older, it's look what I made of myself. And a little bit older child can say, I do it myself. I think a 2-year-old learning to tie his shoes or something, but it's, when Jesus says to become like a child, it's to have that utmost trust in God, to believe absolutely, that God is God, that God is our Father, that God loves us. And I know that not all children have that, a parent or both, two parents especially, that are around showing love and care. But to become like a child is to trust absolutely in God and in God's grace. And to know and to trust that what God wants for us is good things. God doesn't want bad things to happen to us. But it's just to trust in God and to believe in God. And then the next, few verses, if you put a stumbling block in front of one of these little ones, it'll be better if you had a great millstone thrown around your neck and thrown into the sea. To jeopardize someone else's belief or to trust in God, is not what we're supposed to do. We as adults, as parents, as grandparents, are to be the best examples we can and to teach our children about God. And if we don't teach them about God, the world will certainly teach them about the devil and evil. Just something popped up on my screen and I looked to see what it was. And it says, woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. Occasions for stumbling are bound to come. But woe to the one who pushes the stumbling block into place. And I think about that too, stumbling blocks. I mean, there are stumbling blocks. And there are times in our lives when we wonder, where is God? Why, and those are stumbling blocks. And it doesn't mean that we just totally give up. It doesn't mean that because we have those times of wonder or those times that we maybe stumble or maybe we, when we get to be living on our own for a while, we just kind of quit going to church and kind of forget about God. I mean, that can be a stumbling block. Doesn't mean that we can't turn around and come back. Doesn't mean that we can't get back on our feet again. When you're walking down a path, I remember many times walking down the path at Red Willow Lake, and you would, maybe there'd be a tree root there. We got to know where those were, so we'd watch out for them. Or there was this one stone in the path that you would stumble on. But you might stumble and take a couple of missteps to correct it, but you got back on the right track again. And that's what a stumbling block in our faith is. Doesn't mean that we're totally off track and never can get back on. It means that we just need to regain our footing again. And then verses 8 and 9 are, if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. You're better to enter the kingdom maimed than whole with sin. And drastic measures. This is how serious Jesus and God are about sin. We are to do our utmost to live the very best as we can. And, when life throws stumbling blocks in our path, or, we are, some part of our body, we sin on our own. Most of us, it's right up here in the mind, that where the sin comes. But it's, he says, it's better to be maimed than to what? Be thrown into the fire of hell. And it's a serious business, this sin. And then Jesus, goes on, take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. Don't, there are some people who have this just simple faith that, it's unshakable. And it's not to despise them. It's not to, and there are people in the world that look and say, well, I had a person one time a person that I know one time said that religion, church, is for women and weak men. How's all that for looking down on somebody that has faith and trust in God? So don't put somebody down for their faith. And then Jesus tells the parable of the one lost sheep. That the shepherd looks for one. He's, 99. Well, that's a pretty good percentage. But no, he wants 100%. And that's God. God will, he sent his son Jesus into this world for the lost and those that are, seeking him. And, God will do anything and everything to get into the hearts and into the minds of every person there is. And that's why he has sent prophets, and that's why he has the written word, and that's why we have churches, and that's why we have people that live lives that reflect God, so that others might know. And, if he finds that sheep, if the one that stray comes, he rejoices. And that's God. He rejoices. So your Father in heaven will rejoice as well. And then the next part talks about if someone sins against you and doesn't want to, own up to it. The first thing you do is you go talk to that person. You don't talk about them behind your back to your neighbors. You don't start slandering them. You don't do that. You go and you talk to the person face to face. And if you can't come to a resolution, Jesus says, then go to the church and talk to the church, to the pastor, to the church council. Get a couple of other people to mediate. And this is one of the reasons that, people go to therapy. People go for counseling. Is that if you can't resolve a problem one-on-one, you get a third party, hopefully a neutral party, who's got the best interests of both people at hand. And then he says, if this person still won't listen, and you still can't come to an understanding, when you get, the church involved, when you get some other people involved, and, and this isn't one of those deals where, you're each half right, but if someone has totally wronged you that way and won't own up to it, but then, Jesus says, count that person as a Gentile. Count that person as you just write them off. And sometimes we have to do that with people in our lives. And that's hard. It's hard when someone, does you wrong and won't own up to it. And won't, we need to forgive them because that's the first step of our healing. But, sometimes we just need to decide to go on with our lives and put that chapter behind us. And so it's, the problem solving, discipline among followers. And, And, in some ways, Jesus is talking more about, just, followers, people in the church, but this is true with everybody, they don't have to be just church people. But, there are an awful lot of disagreements in the church. I mean, there's fights in the church about an awful lot of things, and, where God would have us working together and pulling together for the good of all, we find those dissensions. And Paul writes about if there are dissensions among you, we need to figure those out and to get straightened out. And the last thing that Jesus says in this book, in this section of this book, is that if 2 or 3 of you agree and ask on me something, I'll be there. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am among them. And it's just that reminder for us that, number one, we never walk alone. God never leaves us alone. But when we come together in numbers, we can do so much more. And God is with us, leading and guiding. He isn't going to lead us and guide us down the wrong path, but he's going to encourage us in everything we can do.